We're going to talk about staging and shot choices and Oner shots because I want to bring that up. There's some cool things. So one, big shout out to everybody. I hope you guys are having a great day. I hope you had a productive day for sure. I had a couple things to do in the morning, some personal stuff, and then story meetings, which were actually pretty productive. And then now I get to chat about story with you guys. So that's actually super fun. A couple questions came up last time. I'll go ahead and try and answer those as well. And we got a new question from a few people. So just as a general announcement, if you haven't seen these before and you want to kind of go and look and see what we talked about before this, you can go to our YouTube channel and you can see the past recordings of this. Also on our Facebook page, you can see the live chats there too, because we've been talking all kinds of great stuff about business practices, about portfolios, about how to structure your drawings and your shots and all of that in between. So that all has to do with storytelling in general and just having a career in this. So that's really important that we get these kinds of ideas out there. So we're taking questions too. So on Instagram and Facebook, if you guys have any questions, feel free to just chat those in. I'll get to them when we can, and hopefully we can get to as many of those questions as possible. Okay, so let me just check my connections here, make sure we're all good. Looks like they are having a little issue with my Instagram feed. At any rate, what has been your experience with shot choices and coming up with staging ideas? Because there's a couple of things that are important when it comes to doing your staging, and you definitely want to get that idea out there first when you construct your scene, is understanding how your characters are going to interact. So give me a second. Let me see if I can get back this Instagram connection, because for whatever reason it is pretty weak sauce. And there we go. So hopefully we're back on. So I was saying about staging, all right? So if you guys don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to staging, it's basically the choreography of whatever's in front of your camera. And it's also the choreography of your camera as you're moving throughout the scene, right? And that is important because it affects the story and it affects the visuals in any kind of story, right? So think about a normal dialogue scene where you have a couple of characters. Let's say it's two characters in a scene and they're talking to each other. Now you can have them standing up or sitting down. That's a choice, right? And you could also have them static, where they're just sitting at a table and they're not doing anything. They're just facing each other. And then you also have a choice of where to put the camera. Either on one side of the two characters, you could put the camera behind one of the characters looking at the other one, so you get kind of an over-the-shoulder shot. But within that scene, depending on how you develop the dialogue in the story and what happens in that story, what you can have is the characters actually get up and move around. And this could happen naturally, just the actors will feel like they need to be moving around and get some kind of emphasis with their emotions and their deliveries. Or you can also move the camera so that it creates visual interest within that scene. Okay, so that's the basics of staging. It's kind of the choreography. Now this gets really complicated and it can get really sophisticated because you can do many cool things with your staging and your shot choices. So you guys all know that there are three basic shot choices. You got your wide shot, your medium shot, and your close-up. Okay, those are pretty much the basic shot choices. Then you can do any different kind of modification of that. You can have the camera up high, you can have the camera low. Like I said, you could have the camera behind somebody's shoulder. You get an over-the-shoulder shot looking at whatever the subject matter is. And then now what happens, let's say the characters get up and move around in the set. and this could be a virtual set, this can be animation, it can be live action, whatever. You can have that camera move with those characters or not. That's something you choose to do. And why this is important is, one, you just don't have. I mean, it's so boring. There's a big difference between doing cinema and creating visual interest with your shots, uh, and you have a cinematic kind of idea versus theater. Now, theater is in a fixed place, and that has a, that's very valid. Theater is great, and it's very reliant on the actors. And you can also have really cool, elaborate sets, and people have been really creative with what they do in theater. But with cinema, you have so much more freedom, especially now with all the digital tools and visual effects. You can do all kinds of really great stuff. And the other thing that I want to touch upon is these big popular oneer shots that I think are getting some attention recently because of like the movie 1912, and that was nominated for some Oscars, and just the way they were trying to do big long takes. But this has been done for a long time, so you can go back to Hitchcock, and he was doing these big long takes. Certainly Alfonso Cuarón, when he did Children of Men, that was one of my favorites, and I love the shots in that film. But there's all kinds of really cool things you can do for oneer shots. It's basically a long shot with one take, and you're filming the choreography and the movement of the characters and the actors. So the reason I want to bring this up is because I watched the movie Extraction yesterday, that you can see on Netflix. I recommend it. It's a really good film. It's a really good action film. And certainly the cinematography there is really cool. And there's an incredibly long action sequence that as soon as it started up, I said, what? I said, what just happened? Because I just noticed, and this is maybe because a fault of my own, that I noticed the camera just like either they did some kind of crazy special effects, or the camera just jumped inside of a moving car and just kept going, right? And then if you watch this film, you know what I'm talking about. It becomes this incredibly elaborate action sequence in a really long take. Now, I'm not to spoil anything. I recommend you watch this movie, but that the way you can do this in many different ways, right? You can physically shoot something in one long take, or you could stitch a bunch of takes together with cuts in between, but the cuts are seamless. So you kind of do cross dissolves, or you have a wipe in front of the camera that goes really fast, and then in editorial, you can cut two pieces of film together, and it creates a seamless effect that it's one continuous shot. The reason I bring this up is to conceptualize something like this as a story artist is really, really difficult. I find this one of the most exciting and fun things to do, but also one of the most challenging things to do. And that's why I think these oneer shots are pretty significant, especially if you pull it off right, like I think they did in this film Extraction. It was excellent. There's a lot of really cool action, incredible choreography. So I don't know how long it took them. I've been watching some kind of behind the scenes to figure out what they actually did, because I'm really into that kind of stuff. Because the conceptualization of what you want to see on screen and then how you actually go about doing it is a wonderful visual challenge. And this is where it comes it really challenges your story and visual skills to be able to do all that and get all the information and also deliver the emotional beats that you need in a particular scene. So for Children of Men, for example, that's also pretty action heavy, but there's some really big drama that's going on during some of these scenes. And in the movie Extraction, it's just fully action, but the intensity level has to be up. And that's where it's important that you get the actors to hit their marks and to really deliver the visuals. And I think they did an excellent job. So the reason I want to point this out is so that you guys know this exists, that you should see examples of it and understand how to do that. And then how to conceptualize it if somebody comes up with an idea. Because oftentimes I see this happen. I see inefficient uses of your staging. And people, especially when I'm working with a script and on a team, and I had a chance to supervise some guys, we do a first pass, and you can see places where things can be combined, or shots can be removed altogether to create a better efficiency. Because one, we have this term of like shoe leather. There's too much shoe leather in a in a sequence. It means like you're doing way too much action than is necessary for the scene, right? And so you can cut things down, because that's one of the tenets of what we do as story artists, is create efficiencies and to really make the the story and the shots flow in a seamless way and in an efficient way. There's nothing extra. You're not putting things that are not adding to the story. Anything that's not adding to the story should be removed. And one of the ways to do this is you can actually combine many things into staging, so you can deliver multiple lines of dialogue in one contiguous shot. Or maybe instead of having 10 shots, you can break that down into 5. And the way you do that is you have character movement, or you have camera movement, or you have both, right? That's how you do it. Okay, so yeah, there's some really good examples of all these kinds of shots, and I think they're really difficult. So yeah, it's some really good comments so far about that. What's up, Mark? Hey, James. Yep, I'm still alive here. We're trying to make the best of this coronavirus deal. So Frank is saying the one-shot technique that comes to mind is the opening scene from Touch of Evil by Orson Welles. Yeah, I should have mentioned that already. That's a really famous big long take, is the opening shot to Touch of Evil. I recommend you guys check that out. In fact, we, on our newsletter that we send out for storyboard art, for those of you guys who follow us, I think we've highlighted that film and Orson Welles a couple times, because he's also one of my favorites, and a lot of us get a lot of that film noir look. That's something that inspires a lot of movies. Yeah, and so The Player from Chad. Hey, Chad, what's up, man? The Player is another great example of a one shot. Check that out. I think that's Robert Altman. And so there's a couple things to keep in mind when you're looking at these shots, because it's not just about okay, can you pull something off and just that challenge. It's also about what kind of story are you trying to tell. So if you do these long one shots and they actually don't mean anything, you're just trying to play around with fancy camera tricks, it doesn't add anything to the story. So things like The Player, or in Touch of Evil, the opening shot is, what are they telling you as an audience member visually, and what kind of information is being delivered there. Now, one thing to think about in staging and those one shots is how within that long take, let's say you have a take that many multiple pieces of action happen, you can break this down into little segments. And what I mean by that is you might have a segment that's a wide shot, but then characters come into the scene and the camera moves closer to them, and all of a sudden you're locked into a medium shot. But this is all the same take, okay? But now you're in a medium shot, you might follow those characters in a medium shot, then they keep on walking, you pull out your back to a wide shot, okay? So then you keep thinking about that into these little segments. And then you might have another element that comes in and you suddenly pan the camera down and you're at a close-up to reveal particular information. Again, this all happens in something like Touch of Evil, because you start out with a really extreme close-up, I think, right? I think you start out on a wide shot, then you get an extreme close-up of the ticking time bomb that goes into the car in the back, and then you pull out wide. And so what happens is, as the audience is watching this, you feel like you're actually looking at a big variety of shots, and you don't actually feel like, it doesn't feel unnatural that you're looking at this if you think about this in those segment terms with different shot variety. Okay, so within that one shot, you got a medium shot, a close up, and a wide, and you're all switching back and forth from that. If you do a one shot and you just have staging that's all one thing, it's all one wide shot, and it lasts for 2 minutes, that is so incredibly visually boring that may not be worth it, and that's where you have to cut in and actually do do insert shots to make it interesting. Okay. Now, let me talk one little second about insert shots and reaction shots, because I often say, especially when you're doing action stuff, those are like the bread and butter shots that you want to reveal impact. Okay. Now, contrast this to what I just mentioned, and go check this out with Extraction, which is a huge, big action scene. Now, I'm just using that because it's the thing that most recently popped into my mind. But like Daredevil, the series. The TV series had some really great action sequences that were super long shots. And at any rate, the impacts, typically what you do is you cut in, you do a close-up on impact. So punches, pa, right, comes in fist comes right at the camera. Then you're going to cut to the guy's close-up as a face, and he goes back in a different close-up shot, and you get that insert reaction shot. So you get that impact, the punch, right? Now, that's just one example. You could also do an insert shot of somebody grabbing the keys on the table as they run out the door, something like that. But these insert shots are used differently in these one shots, because you have to design the whole shot and the whole sequence so that it includes, if you need it, those insert moments, but it's just going to be a moment that's a continuous shot. So the camera would pan down, look at something as a close up, and then pan quickly back up, and you're at your medium shot again, and you reveal everybody else moving around. So John Wick is another really good example of some good action. And the big Hollywood blockbuster movies will do most of the time some really elaborate action pieces that aren't necessarily one take, but again, you want to analyze this stuff for staging and getting all that together. So that's my little spiel about action staging and one shots. I did want to talk to, so we got a question from Miguel here, and he's saying that this is kind of changes the subject here, but again, any question you guys have right now, feel free to throw that up there, and maybe we can, as a group, answer them together. So Miguel is saying that he does a lot of graphic humor and political cartoons, so he's used to solving a story problem in a single panel image, and that's great. I highly recommend you guys do that, and so you're probably really good at that, Miguel, doing single panel storytelling images like a comic strip style, and just doing one moment in a single image and telling that. So his question here is, obviously when storyboarding, that gave me some troubles when I had to board out humor or comedic situation, as I tend to underdo it or overdo it. Can you give me some advice on how to approach a funny scene or a gag, or what should I take into account? Thanks. So this works. The reason I wanted to talk about this question is because this works well with what I just mentioned with staging. So that's where you want to really figure it out, is your staging. Now, you probably have a handle on single panel images. Fantastic. So what you should also consider in a comedic scene is the actual scene. Okay. So a couple of recommendations is look at classic films or classic, they're now classic comedy films like Airplane and Airplane 2, The Naked Gun. Because those, I find they're using visuals. They have like gags, right? They have just like one camera shot gags where there's nothing else going on. But they do often use visual staging within the scene to create comedic results. And there's a different kind of comedy. The other ones I would recommend are Edgar Wright movies, like Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, also what's that video game movie? Somebody help me out here. Is Scott Pilgrim Saves the World? Is that it? Scott Pilgrim? Maybe it's just called Scott Pilgrim. But there's that film by Edgar Wright too, that he's using visual language to show comedy. So then what you do, you could have many different ways of doing it, but he does a lot of like quick pans with the camera. So the characters will say something, the camera will pan, it immediately goes to what they're talking about or the reaction of what they're doing, and then camera will swipe right back to the characters from before. You can do that kind of stuff, and it kind of makes that the scene come alive. It's a little more visual. So those are some things that you can do with comedic staging. Oh, thanks, Chad. Scott Pilgrim versus the World. I got that wrong. That's a cool movie. I think I like Edgar Wright's other films a little bit better, but that's a really creative film. So yeah, comedy is always really hard, and it's hard to come up with gags, and it's hard to come up with visual comedy, because you can also have the performance be comedic, but as a story guy, I personally like to rely on situational comedy, not sitcom wise, where you're, the which is considered of like, the three camera setup like Seinfeld or like, Cheers or something, any of these classic like sitcom shows. What I'm actually thinking about is the situation that the characters are in is funny, right? It's like fish out of water kind of thing. It's like somebody, gets thrown into a professional kitchen who's never cooked before, and they have to cook a meal in a restaurant or something. Like that's where you want to make that, the contrast also oftentimes creates humor. Okay. And so then you got to represent it visually. So one way to do that too, just as we're talking about this in terms of staging, is figure out what elements you have to work with in your scene. Okay, so you could have, let's say there's only one character, but then where do they live? What are they doing? Like, are they Are they going out and walking in the park? Do they have to go and get their car washed? Like what elements do you have to work with, and then what can you do that's funny or new and different that that you wouldn't normally expect as an audience member. So where's the joke? Where's the gag? And then what you want to think about is where you're going to place the camera to best represent that stuff. So going back to Miguel, you might be used to like doing kind of a nice wide master shot of everything going around, and then there's some funny things that are happening. Maybe some things are closer to the camera than others. But what you could do is, start on that master shot, but then go in and have the characters travel through the scene, right? And so if you're at a situation where somebody goes and gets coffee, for example, you have them walk into the door. So how do they do that? Do they trip on the way in? Does somebody make fun of the clothes they're wearing as they're waiting in line? When they go to pay, do they spill their coffee? All of these things. And where are you going to put the camera? How is it going to capture all of those moments? And that'll help you create the sequence. And then again, think of the wide, medium, and close, right? So don't just go wide in your master shot all the time, or don't just do medium shots all the time. And most of the time, actually, people avoid the close-ups. Most of the time, I think what I see is a tendency. Everybody has a tendency to just continually do medium shots. And what you should probably think of is just a little more variety there, right? So chat has a great. Oh, thanks, Keely, for helping me out there. Good to see you on here. So Chad says the scene with Brandon Roof, am I pronouncing that correctly? BF number 3 and the twins, BF 5 and 6, really good examples of visual comedy in unique situations. I might be butchering that explanation because I'm not familiar with those films, but Brandon Ruth, okay. Oh man, Frank, thank you, my friend. So Frank DeTrano here is also talking about the classic Roadrunner and Coyote cartoons were great examples of visual comedy. Absolutely, how could I forget? Those Looney Tunes like Tex Avery, Chuck Jones, even some of the early Disney stuff, and like the more on the shorts, which I really loved. That it was all visual comedy, especially the stuff without dialogue. Okay, and that was it's just the way that they set up, Tom and Jerry, right, the cat and mouse, and the Roadrunner versus the Coyote. It's like, just watch those again, and it goes from gag to gag to gag to gag, but some of them, they're in multiple shots, not just one long shot. And then usually we all remember, like, Coyote runs off a cliff and he just, big long shot, you see him fall down in a puff of dust, right? or smoke. And those are all awesome, right? And I think, fortunately you can dig these up on YouTube, or even like Amazon Prime had a couple like classic cartoon examples. The funny thing is, for me, when I watch these things, is that you don't realize how used to a widescreen aspect ratio we are nowadays, where things are wide. Like your telephone, if you turn it on horizontal, it's a widescreen. Your television that you buy most of the time, or your HD TV is a widescreen, and so these shorts sometimes are done in the more square format, the 4:3, like a boxier format. So that's because that's the way television screens were back then, or that's the way they just decided to do it. So you're going to see different formatting, and then most of the time, like on an Amazon Video or something, they'll just either have black bars, or they'll put like color bars on the side of the screen. I remember back in the day, we used to do that. You had to do the reverse. So in a widescreen movie, you'd end up cropping the sides of the film, or you would have like black bars on the top and the bottom because your television screen was rectangular, or more rectangular than they are now. And then people would get annoyed, but well, why? I'm missing half of the image. What's going on? And actually, no, you're seeing the full image. It's just not filling up the whole screen because it's a rectangular format. So nowadays, that's actually getting a little. I'm glad that this argument of widescreen versus the more square 4:3 thing is kind of in the past, because I really like doing widescreen stuff. I think it's easier to compose that way. So there is something to be said about aspect ratios. Yeah, so this is all cool. So yeah, great comments here. I think just remember a couple of tips when you break down anything, whether you're doing comedy, action. Staging is hugely important, and it's something that we as story artists actually have a lot of control over when we work from a script. So let's say you have a script that you don't have much um, ability to suggest any changes. Okay, so they give you a script and you basically have to execute the script. Now, one thing that we have that's within our control that can influence a lot of the storytelling is the staging within the script. Now, remember, the staging is the choreography of the characters, and when they come out, and when the camera comes into play and moves around the scene, and you can affect the story and the dialogue in many ways. So oftentimes I've done things like, I wasn't particularly happy with the way the dialogue was written in a script. So one thing I'll do is I'll try and add visual cues to create subtext within that dialogue to create like a deeper meaning or something a little more exciting. And I'll try and do that visually. And so I'll suggest things of like, things to do that is you put the character in a particular situation. So um, uh, let me try and think of something. Well, if you're at home, you got your kitchen, you got your living room, etc. So you could have a person in the living room watching TV, but they're having a conversation with somebody, but they're watching TV instead of actually paying attention to that person, right? So then their eye lines would be different, and you would show that they're not actually interested in the conversation. Yet the way it's written, they might actually be talking to each other, but the way you're showing it visually as a story artist, your choice to show the person distracted by watching something else and not even paying attention, not even giving the guy, eye contact. That says a lot about the story. Okay, these are all visual tricks that you can do with staging. That's really important that you can that you can do, right? Cool. All right. So this is good comments on here. Let me see. Yeah, this is a great comment from Kumar here. So he's saying when it's an action scene, I often see too many cuts to show the action, and it becomes very confusing for a viewer of what exactly is happening. Can slow motion in between solve this? That's a good question, and you're right. There oftentimes it could be a stylistic choice, or it could be uh, maybe they just overdo it. That they don't. Let's say their storytelling judgment is not as refined as yours are or ours are, and so then they just cut too many times. It becomes overkill, and there's just so much stuff going on. It feels like a video game, or something to that effect. So be careful when you're doing that for one. But then your question is, can you use slow motion to help that out? Yeah, absolutely. And it's difficult as a story artist because we're just doing a visual medium. You can indicate on your board, say like slow motion effect, or write it in there. The shot would be in slow motion of like a close up punch, right? Or the guy, reloads his gun, right? Action scene. So he's like pulls out his what do you call that? The clip, and then he loads up his gun, clack clack, right? All of that happens in slow motion, and it's really overly dramatic. And then you cut right away to something that's in fast motion. I think you're seeing more and more of that, especially like I'm mentioning in films like John Wick, or maybe even the movie Extraction. I can't remember if there was much slow motion in that. It's all part of the style, right? And it all depends because, for example, I worked a lot on Star Wars films and Star Wars TV shows and stuff. That uh, that's not something they use in the Star Wars universe. You don't use slow motion, which is an interesting thing. And I can't remember if in the last Jedi film, the last Star Wars film, Episode 9, right? Am I getting that right? They use slow motion, and I think I was like, "What?" I couldn't believe it. I said, "What is going on here?" And they did something that was outside of what you know I think many of us have learned to think of as the Star Wars language, right? And so I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. I actually think it's kind of cool and novel. So actually it wasn't slow motion. It was or was it? I think it was either slow motion. They also did lens. They did what do you call it? A zoom lens. They did a zoom lens focus pull with the lenses. That's also not typical in Star Wars films. So you can go back and see what I'm talking about. That's not how you usually do that. So yeah, some good stuff here. Oh, okay. Mark has some really cool comments here. Um, so so yeah, you're saying the Transformers movies are a little overkill, and yeah, it's all for taste. The funny thing is with these films, it's entertainment, and they're big films, and they got big actors, and they make big money. So it's a funny thing. It's a funny contradiction that a film that you might not like or you might think is not up to par still makes a ton of money. And I think because there's still enough entertainment value for other people to watch. So that's kind of cool. Hey Kenny, good to see you, buddy. It's nice to have mentorship alums on here like Chad and Kenny. Great to see you guys. Um, yeah, and then Wahab is on here. Hey, buddy, good to see you. Yeah, there's a lot of wipes in Star Wars, so there's a visual language that you use. And I saw there was another film that I was watching. It was a it was a western. It was Wyatt Earp by, and not the I'm trying to remember. It's actually the writer of Star Wars, Lawrence Candon. Uh, what's his name? Forgot. Anyway, I'm terrible with names, but anyway, he did the film Wyatt Earp, and it's ironic that in that film they're using wipes because I felt it was a little bit out of place. Now that was just that was the style that they went for, and after a while you get used to it. But the first thing I could think of was like, oh, that's a Star Wars thing, right? And I haven't, I don't know if that is has anything to do with the reason of using that stuff. So anyway, there's visual language when it comes to doing all that. So it's all really good. Okay, so cool. I think that will do it for today. The other thing is, if you have any other questions or issues that are on your mind, maybe you have some good examples of films that we should be watching, and please send that our way. Just post that in the chat, or send us a message, or because we'll share it with everybody, and that way we can learn together, and then we'll see if we like it or not. So the one film I recommend, and maybe I should have bought stock in Netflix before I recommend this because it's a Netflix film, is go watch Extraction and see if you like it, and see if you agree or disagree with some of the staging choices that I mentioned here today. All right, friends. Good to see you. Keep up the good work with all your stories, and keep working hard. This stuff is not easy. It is not easy to do. So you have to work at it and keep at it to stay on top of your game, and make sure that your visual choices, your creativity is always really, really sharp. All right, guys. So good to see you. We'll have another one of these later on this week. Talk soon. See ya. Bye bye.